Welcome into the Hear Me, See Me podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Bruner. This is the project, an initiative of WIBW TV, raising awareness of mental health and having conversations about the various issues and the personal stories surrounding mental health and mental health awareness. We're in November, which is a month that we dedicate to veterans, and mental health is a huge issue for our veterans and first responders. So who better to bring in for a conversation today than Eric Kirsch. He is the current undersheriff in Wabaunsee County, Kansas, soon to be sheriff there because he is unopposed or was unopposed in the November election, and so he will be promoted come January. And also a military background.
Yes, ma'am.
So what was your military service? Let's start with the first part of your story.
I attended the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina on a scholarship, and I commissioned in the Marine Corps in 2004. I was a counterintelligence officer. I did 2 deployments to Iraq and 1 to Afghanistan. And I was assigned to NCIS for the last 4 years of my military career, and was also a contractor for the State Department in northern Iraq and Kurdistan for the ISIS invasion in 14 and 15. So between military and contracting, I did 5 deployments to the Middle East, and most of it was a lot of fun. But
fun, but with some, I'm sure, dramatic moments mixed in. And then you decided to enter law enforcement.
Right, yeah.
What was that decision all about?
It's pretty underwhelming. So thank you for having me, by the way.
You're welcome.
It's amazing to me that I'm even here.
Which is a loaded statement, and we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But why did you enter law enforcement?
I watched Die Hard a lot when I was a kid. I'm not kidding. I watched Die Hard, yeah, and Cops, and I wanted to do 2 things when I was a little kid. I wanted to be a Marine, and then I wanted to fight and catch bad guys. So I got to do that as a Marine, and then as a federal criminal investigator with NCIS. And I was assigned to the DC field office on the counterintelligence squad. And I was also on the MCRT, the major case response team, which was all major crimes. And one of my very first cases was a serial killer in the Marine Corps who was responsible, Jorge Torres, who was responsible for the murder of Navy Petty Officer Amanda Snell in 2010. That was my very first case after graduating from the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. So I was a Marine and an NCIS agent while also looking forward to a deployment in Afghanistan after I'd done 2 deployments to Iraq. And it was just sort of a different time where in the middle of the global war on terror, when there was just a lot of operational tempo and we were very busy and there was a lot of things happening at home and abroad. So I got a good chance to see, for better or worse, the different plights that affected everybody involved. There's a lot to unpack here. I know we got a condensed amount of time.
Yeah,
so.
You had a lot on your plate and a lot that you've
Right.
seen. How you ended up here was because of some of your posts that you've been very open about how those experiences impacted you. It's also why the San Pellegrino is here, and we will get to the water in a moment. But the Wabaunsee County Sheriff's Office, folks, if you haven't seen their Facebook page, you talk very openly about funny things that you respond to, like, of course, it's a rural area, so animals are loose. People repeatedly driving down a certain road that becomes impassable.
Let's say it out loud.
The water that you will share if folks feel they need to talk. But you also have talked about helping people through difficult moments and being a call that people can make for help and support, not necessarily for punishment or retribution. And that's what I found interesting about your story and why I reached out to you and said, would you share a little bit more about what you're being through? When you go back to your military service, you'd been in Afghanistan, and as we start the conversation right away, I want to remind everyone if there's anything that you hear that you start to feel uncomfortable with or it puts you in a tough spot, remember that 988 hotline is there for you to call anytime to talk to anyone and find some help and support yourself. So that time in the military, Afghanistan, you said it was a fun time, but it wasn't all fun. What was the reality of the situation? What was the day-to-day stressors that you were encountering? Everything.
Jeez, wow. There was it was a lot of in retrospect, we had a mission. I was there as an NCIS agent. I was active duty, and we did everything from, I had to do a crime scene of an active shooter event in the summer of 2011. I did the bedside interrogation of the shooter, who was an Afghan police officer who wasn't motivated by the Taliban to murder the American Marines that he was working alongside. We did several other pretty interesting things, patrol missions, equipping, evaluating the Afghan commandos, doing other internal counterintelligence investigations, combat operations, and also there was quite a wide variety of routine tragedies that we would have to go out and confront. And the last major one of these tragedies was a electrical fire in the city of Herat that claimed the lives of several Marines who had just gotten back from a mission. And so, yeah, to answer your question, and again, I'm going to be authentic. I don't want to come off to, I didn't prepare much for this, and I wanted to just be myself, and there's a lot to it, and it's hard to really simplify these things. The good thing is that you have time afterwards to kind of look back, and some of it is difficult. Most of it is difficult. And I think for each veteran and contractor, because there was thousands of American contractors in Iraq and Afghanistan, but for veterans and their families, there's so much time afterwards to look back, and it could consume you if you allow it to. And that's what happened to me too. You know, since I'm in a leadership position now, I have obligations to very close people to me and the public, but my best friends, both living and dead, I still have obligations to. My duties as next sheriff is to tell the truth and to be brave. And I will damn well be authentic when it comes to these experiences that I've had, and mine were very painful. I was a functional alcoholic for 3 years after the wars. That's how I never got in trouble with the work of the law. But I drank to compensate. You know, like earlier you asked me, and other people have asked me
the origins of the San Pellegrino.
Why the Pellegrino? I replaced Jack Daniels with Pellegrino, and I've been sober almost 8 years now. And it has given me the strength I needed to functionally and deal with these different things. I miss my friends. I lost 13 very close friends of mine over a space of 10 years. 11 were killed in action, and 3, two committed suicide. One was my roommate, and one was my teammate. So those are, I think, the most painful.
It sounds like what you're saying, and I think people can relate to, without you having to go into and relive all the details,
Sure.
is that you saw very difficult things, very tragic things.
Right.
And at the same time, because of the environment, your body's constantly in the fight or flight mode. You don't have that, you say you had time, but it sounds like that time came after you got home and you're back with your family.
There's a sudden stop. You're busy. I lived out of suitcases and sea bags for years and years and years. You're constantly, like, you're looking forward to the next deployment after you're still kind of getting over, or you press the pause button on what happened, because you got to get ready for your next deployment. So you do workups and you go, and then you do workups and you go, and along the way there's people that are very important to you, pillars of your life that are gone, and they suffer, and the survivors suffer divorce, or they suffer alcoholism or other addictions or other damaging behaviors. And during the time, what made some of it more difficult than anything else, including combat, because the combat portions were, I'm not a Rambo at all, but did my fair share of certain things, endured my fair share of certain things. The climate at the time was, when Marines would say, they would be hesitant to say I have a problem, because at the time, and this was quite a bit of time, the Marine Corps considered it, not officially, but it wasn't the Marine had a problem, the Marine was the problem when it came to mental health, because everyone, like it or not, the myth was if you had an issue, you don't raise your hand. Mm-hmm. You're going to be assigned to they're going to take you out of the only thing that gives you a sense of purpose and mission, which is your unit and being around other Marines. So there was a fear to raise your hand and say, hey, I'm having problems with X, Y, or Z, or experiencing symptoms. And so, including me, we just sort of opted out of saying anything and dealt with it poorly, you know.
Compartmentalization only gets you so far. At some point, you do have to deal with it. Do you feel like that's improved? Do you feel like people like yourself who share stories and reach out are helping to allow people to have some of that processing time after the incident without having to be taken away from the very support group that they formed around them?
Sometime around 2013, the commanding general of the old Walter Reed in D.C., he was a physician, but he was an Army, either a brigadier or major general. He came out about having PTSD. And I think that was the initial official, it's okay, I'm dealing with it too, I've got it too. And you have no longer need to be afraid to come forward. And it opened the door. It started the slow process of reducing the stigma associated with it. As if it wasn't bad enough that we had this endless war, this 2-decade-long war, those that were in pain and suffering because of it didn't have the ability to, or the interest, because of the fear of being taken out of the game or being labeled a certain way. Yeah.
Now, that was the turning point nationally. Was it a turning point for you?
No.
Took you a little bit to get the message.
I kept going. Warrior culture is a drinking culture at some level too, and there was an emphasis. I think we didn't really talk about it that much back in the old days. We didn't talk about it. We loved each other. Most people in combat, there's bonds that develop. There's relationships that are hardened and forever. I think if you go through some of these experiences, they're not you don't want to forget some of them, and you can't forget some of them. And it's in the after stages when people retire or they leave the service, when they get out of the Marine Corps and they're having issues, that's when the conversations really started. The VA, I'm a patient at the VA. They've done great by me. Shout out to Topeka VA. They're fantastic. Plenty of my friends have had a lot of great experiences with the VA. And I felt it's very important to be vulnerable and be open. And I'm a regular person. I'm a total nobody. And I've dealt with some challenges, and I haven't cured myself. I think that's sort of an impossibility to say that everything's okay forever. But you have to have the power of attention and discipline to try to overcome some things. How do you stop a damaging behavior such as like alcohol? You know, I got pancreatitis from alcohol use, which is a pretty horrible condition. I was laid up in the hospital for a week, and the closest thing I could do to describe it was like a sword made of fire that was within my body cavity. It was horrifically painful, and that was from drinking. So I got out of the hospital, and then I felt better after a few weeks, and I kept drinking. And I got pancreatitis again, but this time it was in Kurdistan. So I was in an Iraqi hospital for a week on morphine and letting my pancreas heal. And we would validate it by, this is the way we deal with our issues or problems. So, and looking back on everything, the absurdity of everything, it's wild that I can't believe I got out of any of it alive, right? So it's a difficult thing to, when you're at your weakest, to recognize or identify the fact that there's a problem. And another thing to ask for help. And then a third difficult challenge is to actually receive the help that everyone deserves if they're in pain. I'm glad I went through what I did. I'm glad I survived it. I'm glad I'm in a position now where I can talk about it. And I forgive me, and to the viewers and people listening, I'm nervous because I'm on a podcast with Melissa, and thank you for having me. But I'm more comfortable in other environments than this, but I'm working on it, so I appreciate you.
You're doing great.
Appreciate you being patient with me. But hope is not a plan, but it is a commodity, and we need to produce that, you know. And I'm a public figure. I am, what regionally respected on Facebook now. That's not awesome. But how do I use that commodity? And I'm going to do it our bodies are nothing but conduits for energy. So it's either positive or negative. And I'm compulsory going to choose positive. How do we spread that hope where it's okay? If you're in pain, it's okay. Everyone's in pain. There's not a single human being that hasn't experienced trauma of some sort, loss of a loved one. Veterans don't have a proprietary marker or claim on pain and suffering. Everyone goes through it. It's more pronounced. It's for some than others. But everyone is deserving of not suffering. And there are options and assistance out there. And it's just, I didn't ever appreciate the unspoken rule of leadership in the military at the height of the war, where it was, don't you dare ask for help, because that level of fear was pretty powerful. And it's I don't know the state of the Marine Corps right now, and I'd like to assume in the Navy that it's gotten better, and I'm hopeful that it has. But for law enforcement, for nurses, for firefighters, for paramedics, that routinely, even tow truck drivers on I-70, routinely encounter these pretty horrific things, and they're dealing with it poorly, like by drinking, avoidance, isolation, symptoms of PTS. It's okay. It's okay that you're human. Unless you're a sociopath, you're going to be affected. If you touch war, it's going to touch you. If you touch a fatality accident, even if you witnessed it, it's going to stay within you. And it's not appropriate for you to sit there and suffer forever. You just can't do it. It's unsustainable. So, yeah, I think that who are we as a society not to acknowledge these things and then also communicate and offer very beneficial and tangible ways to get out of it.
We talk about that as journalists.
Yes.
We're responding to and covering the scenes. We are not as intimately involved in them as our law enforcement officers and first responders are, but we have to talk about them.
Right.
And you're supposed to try to talk about them and not start crying, which sometimes can be super tough. And then you're just supposed to go on and talk about more things the next day that are terrible. I mean, hopefully in law enforcement you get some days where you're not only dealing with the bad things, you're dealing with some good things along the way as well. But those things are day in, day out, day in, day out. What have you tried to do to spread that message within your own agencies that you've been involved with as a law enforcement officer, to let your officers and dispatchers and other responders that you affiliate with know that they need to debrief after all of these things?
I tell them what I just told you, that I've gone through it too. For instance, when I make DUI arrests, and sometimes it's not just a one-off, they're not coming back from the bar. They're extraordinarily intoxicated at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I can tell, hey, I won't go into details, but certain people have said things like, you don't know what this feels like, and I'll sit down when it's appropriate, okay? Share part of my experiences. Like, I've been sober 8 years. I was a functional alcoholic. When I wasn't drinking, I wanted to drink. Like, I was catching serial killers, right? So I would validate everything, and it's a way to essentially say, I know what you're going through. I'm not above you. I'm a nobody, but I figured it out. So when you share part of yourself, and when you're vulnerable, and when you're authentic, and when you're being a human being, and you can say, I've gone through this, I don't have all the answers, and I've helped a lot of people, but you're the person I'm helping now. Be that a coworker or anybody. If you're alive, I'm going to help you. I want to help you. That's just the way I'm built. And there's always hope. But people at their weakest will never, they're the most deserving of knowing that they're worth fighting for. And sometimes they need that help to get there, because no one's figuring things out on their own. No one's just going like, I got it, I got the answer. It takes a lot of different guides to get you there. So that's what happened to me. I had several.
I was going to say, what was your warning point?
People that loved me enough to tell me that I was wrecking my life.
Okay, but did you listen?
No, not at first.
Yeah,
No. I lost
yeah.
a marriage over it.
Yeah.
I was amicably divorced in 2015. I moved out to Kansas originally to be closer to my daughter because I could be a cop anywhere, but I had to be a dad here, right? And but yeah, I drank. My ex-wife, and we're good friends. She had enough, and we split up. And yeah, it was a cost. It was a huge cost. And then I continued to drink because that was a pain, right? That was a huge loss. And with my wife Jessie, she initially, when we got together, I was still drinking, not as much as I was in the past, but drinking nonetheless. And she basically gave me an ultimatum, which I followed, and said, I love you, but I don't love you if you're going to continue to do this, because she had been with people in her past that had issues with it. I chose her, and I chose life, and I also chose sobriety and health and myself, because I was ready at that point. I was ready to get better. I was tired of hurting. I'd buried so many friends. I've gone to 22 funerals. I have people that I still feel like they're gonna call at any minute, and they've been dead for over a decade, and I miss them. And one of my best friends in high school committed suicide. That was tough. I lost friends in combat. That was horrible. I saw the cost of on families, Gold Star families, and it's one of those things where you have to at some point kind of give up. It's okay to surrender, and it's okay to ask for help. And when I talk to, whether it's cops or firefighters or my fellow veterans, if you're a leader in any industry, you better be willing to be vulnerable, because in order to be taken seriously, you have to make sacrifices. And if one of those sacrifices includes removing the illusion that you're a perfect person and you got it all figured out, then you better communicate that, and you better say, I hurt too, and I didn't figure it out instantly, but it's okay for you to tell me about it. You're still going to have a job. You're still absolutely functional. It should not be a stigma. Yeah, it's a problem if you keep drinking every single day, right, in any industry, but they need to be reassured by the confidence of leadership to give them that permission to go, raise your hand, it's okay, and I'll do it with you. I'm not going to go into details, but I've taken coworkers, I've taken my fellow veterans to VA hospitals and other detox centers without loss of their career. As long as they're being honest and they're participating, they're doing the work, and they're ready. I've found that with most people suffering from any addiction, it's really only until the individual decides to make a change in their life that a change will occur.
So what would be your advice for the loved ones then? Just that persistence?
It's complicated. I don't want to speak to generalities or an absolute. I don't know. Love sometimes is not enough. Like, you're a runner, right? Love will get you to the finish line, but sometimes, it'll get you to the starting line. But like any relationship, the longest relationship you have is with yourself. And at a certain level, you're going to have to know who you are. And if you don't have that confidence, figure it out. And there's ways to do that. There's pathways to it. But here's another hypocritical thing that I did. So when I was a Marine Corps captain, I was fake strong, and I was drinking when I wasn't at work, right? And I would have Marines that were dealing with some pretty serious stuff when they were home. Just back from Iraq, Afghanistan, Africa, who knows where, dealing with a lot of complicated issues at home or at work. But fundamental complexities in life, which made life very difficult, and to the point where suicide became an option. And I would encourage them to get help and to enter a treatment program while I was at the same time suffering and not taking the same advice that I was giving, out of fear of being taken out of the game.
What advice would you offer to people to prepare them? I think particularly perhaps maybe a veteran who's transitioning out of active duty back to that civilian life, because sometimes some of the struggle comes from no one prepares you for what's going to happen next. No one prepares you for suddenly that whole group of built-in brothers and sisters that you had is not there every day, because they've gone back to their homes as well. That person regimenting your life and telling you you're going to be here at this time, here at this time, here at this time, and now suddenly you've got all this time and no one's telling you what to do with it. I guess I liken it to, as a survivor of violent crime, I wish people would have told me that you're going to have this anxiety in a certain situation. You're going to perhaps wake up in the middle of the night and have this feeling.
Right.
You know, you're going to have these reactions. These things are going to happen. What is perhaps the biggest thing you've learned that you could pass on to veterans who are facing that same transition?
Are you familiar with the artist Kendrick Lamar? Do you know who that is? The rapper.
Yes.
I'm a huge fan. He's got a song, High Power, and it's like, and one of the quotes in it is, build your own pyramids and write your own hieroglyphs. So you have to self-manifest some of these things. If you're leaving the service, if you're entering retirement, so say, forget the military stuff. If you're doing anything of consequence that you've invested and sacrificed a majority of your life to, that has come with a cost. Have a plan. Have a plan. Going back to, for service members, for men and women exiting the military, have a plan and stick to the plan. And it could be something as simple as, if you want to live somewhere new, do that, move there and get a job, have a mission, have a purpose. Every one of us was excited, I certainly was, to get out. I couldn't wait to get out. And when I got out, I missed the Marines. I still miss Marines. I didn't miss the Marine Corps, but I definitely missed my Marines. And for those of us that survived, we are all forever bonded and we're close. And I could call any one of them up at any minute. And it's a reminder of who we were, good and bad. However, a lot of times, especially when I got out, there is a loss of identity that you have to deal with. You have to rediscover yourself. You have to be an explorer again. You have to say, God, I was so tied up with, all right, I'm Lieutenant Kirsch, and then I'm Captain Kirsch, and then I'm Special Agent Kirsch, and I was a contractor doing things in Iraqi Kurdistan for the war against ISIS over there. And I got back and I'm like, who the hell am I? And you have to discover that again. And it's a difficult thing to do. It's a damn near impossible thing to do by yourself. And everyone goes through those journeys when you remove the thing that you think made you you. And it really was just sort of a bit of ego clothing, right? It was a coat that you borrowed. You've got to make your own pyramids. You got to make your own hieroglyphs. You got to make your own clothing. You got to reinvent and rediscover and evolve. You're either revolving or you're evolving, and it's a deliberate choice, and it's difficult. But everything that is difficult is worth it, and it's powerful when people can not change who they are, but change their destination. And that option is available to everybody who's willing to do that.
I think that's powerful for people to know going in.
Yeah, I mean,
and to know you have to put in the work, but also know that there are people who are there still to support you and help you along the way.
There's so I'm assuming I'm not dead next week. I will hope to be elected sheriff, and this isn't a political thing, but I got super lucky. I ran unopposed. It was an amazing experience. I got 10 pounds bigger because I met with so many people door to door, getting fed pound cake, right, by all these nice people.
It is rural Kansas. We're Midwest nice.
Right. Here's some cookies, and I was very like, "Wow, this is great." But one day that's going to end, and I'm going to be ready for the next thing in life. My intention is to, like with everything else, my whole life's been one weird happy accident. I'm not terribly good at anything except for discipline. I'm more disciplined than I think I should be, right? And it's been something that has been a fuel for me. But I have to get ready even for the next change. If I were to, say, become infirm and not be able to be a peace officer anymore, I'll figure something out. But you definitely need to have a mission and a drive and a purpose. So there's just so much, there's so many more better things that are happening for people that are dealing with pain versus the old routine and regimen of an endless prescription of SSRIs or opioids or both, which led to a lot of problems in the darker days of the wars. And now I've been following latently the development of psychedelic studies as it comes to the VA, There's pilot program initiatives using MDMA in clinical settings for treatment of PTS, depression, anxiety. With veteran cohorts, there's some interesting things that are, I'm just going to say it, I've got 3 good friends of mine that have gone and done psychedelic therapies that have changed their lives. They're all members of the special operations community, and they've gone to clinics in Mexico because it's not legal here in the United States, and they've gone through regimented batteries of psilocybin, DMT, dimethyltryptamine, and ibogaine to stop these horrific ailments that were plaguing them post-war, after 10, 20, 25 years in the service. One of my friends that I won't mention by name, obviously, he did 13 deployments as a SEAL. 13 deployments all over the world, but primarily in Iraq and Afghanistan. And he became addicted to illicit narcotics. He went from, apex predator and the ultimate, badass to being divorced, essentially penniless, directionless, without a mission. And 5 years ago, he had an experience at a clinic for psychedelics, and now he's doing great.
So for some people, there are different answers for others.
And I wouldn't recommend it for everybody, obviously. And this is not me as representation of the agency saying go out and get some mushrooms and you'll be fine. I'm just saying we need to explore alternatives too. I mean, I'm open to the idea. I don't understand when people have the statement of I refuse to be convinced. I demand to be convinced that there's other ways to do things, because some things are not working. This pattern of we just go around a circle and count the numbers instead of going, hey, there's actually a different way, but it's taboo, or it's a new stigma that you have to conquer and vanquish and replace the stigma with facts. But there's some new things that I'm very enthusiastic about. And again, not for everyone. I'm not saying go out and
it's regulated. Right. I mean, I think that's key.
Right.
What you're talking about is something that's regulated and supervised and not self-medicating, whether it's with alcohol or opioids or anything else. So
it's curious to me when some people have a very rigid stance on, say, like psychedelic therapies, and then there's a liquor store in every corner at the same time. Right, and who is deserving of access to those things? It can't just be veterans. It can't just be cops. It should be when it's appropriate. But increasingly, I've read and seen, and with my own eyes, and met, especially my friends' experiences that have done it. Their lives have tremendously improved because of it. And it's not a silver bullet. I don't think there's any shortcuts. There's no one way of doing things. I just don't appreciate the rigidity of certain established beliefs. And it's okay to, for instance, I'm glad I didn't go to Iraq with a musket. Right? I'm glad we evolved. I'm glad I didn't have a tin helmet and I had a Kevlar. Small adjustments and improvements in quality of care. And again, I'm not saying go out and just do whatever you want to do, but be empowered by some knowledge and some studies on some things.
And for you, the San Pellegrino offer is real, right?
Correct.
If we go through Wabaunsee County, Kansas, and you want to chat, stop in and see Sheriff Kirsch and have a water, which I love. To be open about it, I appreciate that the sentiment as well that it starts with leadership. In any agency or organization, the realization that people have lives, they have challenges and traumas that they're experiencing outside of your workplace. And it's not always obvious. For first responders and law enforcement, it can be pretty obvious. We know that you are going to the homicide scene. We know you're going to the fatal wreck scene. Other workplaces, you don't know what is happening in someone's life.
It starts with leadership and needs to continue by leadership, and it's a top-down driven process. But yeah, I chose deliberately to be open with my own experiences because I'm not ashamed of anything. I have nothing to be ashamed of. It's okay to suffer, and I am obligated to attempt to improve the lives of everyone around me. And if I'm not taking care of my coworkers, they can't do their jobs. because our community depends on us. First it was my country, now it's my community, but the service is the same in the sense. And there shouldn't, it's bad enough that people are dealing with different things. It's even worse when there's this air of like, you can't talk about it and you shouldn't talk about it. And yes, if you surrender on a warrant in Wabaunsee County, we give you a complimentary bottle of delicious San Pellegrino mineral water. But yeah.
But it's okay. It's okay to suffer. It's just not okay to suffer in silence.
Yeah.
And to suffer alone. And that's why we have this project. Remember, you can go to WIBW.com/hearmeseeme for a whole bunch of resources. The 988 hotline is there for you 24/7. Sheriff Kirsch, we appreciate you, because being open and knowing that other people are out there and are willing to be vulnerable and share their story is vital to letting others know that we do hear you. We do see you.